Now on Film 4, with our FrightFest season continuing later tonight, we bring you a first-hand appreciation of horror from the director of Cabin Fever and Hostel and the producer of the forthcoming mock doc The Last Exorcism. A filmmaker who loves to scare and be scared, Eli Roth.
Think of a time when I wasn't a horror fan. Even when I was 3 years old and I saw The Wizard of Oz, my favorite part was the witch melting and the flying monkeys. Because the flying monkeys was the scariest thing to me. But I was always naturally drawn to what was terrifying. And not in real life. I mean, a very, very happy childhood, very idyllic, very peaceful, growing up in the safest city in America, in suburban. My father's a psychiatrist. My mother had been a teacher and is a painter. And really this very, very ideal suburban American childhood where at night you just start wondering what if a guy came with an axe and took all this away from me. And so I always loved scary movies, but as a child there was no cable television. And movies, you'd have to wait years for them to come to TV. Like I remember you get The Birds or The Exorcist, but there weren't a lot of bloody horror movies. So a film like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, once it was out of the cinemas, maybe it would come through once every 2 or 3 years, but I was 8 or 9 years old. I wasn't old enough to go see it. So you'd have to talk to some kid's older brother who had seen it, and they would graphically describe everything that happened. And there would be some kid's brother had seen Last House on the Left. They're like, what's it like? What's it like? He's like, oh, man, they rip her guts out. And you're going, oh, my God. So suddenly what actually was in these movies was far worse in my imagination. And I remember when I was 10 or 11, we got our first VCR, and I finally saw Dawn of the Dead. And I had looked in books and seen pictures and had read about Tom Savini, and I knew every effect in the movie, but to finally see it was so satisfying. And I'll never forget the experience of watching Evil Dead. I mean, that movie, it was like The Exorcist, up until that point, was the scariest movie I'd ever seen. And this was just like The Exorcist, times 100. I mean, everybody was possessed, and anyone could get possessed at any moment. It was so scary. It took me an entire afternoon to get through it because I had to stop the tape and go outside in the daylight and decompress. I mean, literally watching it in 10-minute sections. And I thought, this is all I want to do. I mean, I became obsessed with filming and directing and, Stanley Kubrick and Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. And I was always fascinated with the process of filmmaking. And, I grew up in Boston, which is on the other end of the country from Hollywood. And, people would say to me, oh, you'll never make it. You have to be born there. You have to know someone. And I remember being literally, 13 years old at my bar mitzvah when the rabbi has to say what you're going to do with your life. And he said, Eli Roth is here. Today he's bar mitzvah, and he's going to be I remember him adjusting his glasses going, a motion picture producer director. And the whole place laughed. And I remember I was like, yeah, just keep laughing because I will have the last laugh. They laughed at me in my bar mitzvah. But I was the freak in the neighborhood. I mean, if you wanted to see a video nasty, you came over to Eli's house. I mean, I had everything. I had Evil Dead. I had Dawn of the Dead. I had Faces of Death. I mean, girls were afraid of me. I was like a little fat horror nerd that girls wanted absolutely nothing to do with because I was sick for liking these things. And I would say it's makeup. It's magic tricks. I never saw anything wrong with it. But I grew up in a very conservative town where it's like you are going to be a doctor or a lawyer or you're going to go to business school. And literally, other than my circle of friends, kids laughed at me for wanting to make horror films. But I never for a second thought I'm going to grow out of this or this is a phase. And I always took them seriously and I always loved them. And I remember in film school talking to other kids. There was 700 kids in my directing program. And they would make these movies that were these movies about, like, homelessness. And literally in my student film was Ronald McDonald getting decapitated and, like, McDonaldland characters, their eyes getting stabbed out and getting impaled on things. I mean, it was like Monty Python level of absurd violence mixed with animation. It was insane. And I remember kids were saying, don't you want people to take you seriously as an artist? I was like, what are you talking about? I want to be entertaining from the time the lights go down to the time the credits roll. That's what's most interesting. And they'd say, what's your message? What's your message? I was like, what's wrong with having a message saying, I want to be entertaining? I mean, when you make a great horror film, to a certain level, it upsets people. And that's where, you're getting reviews of people going, this is horrible, this is disgusting. It's like, well, it elicited a very strong reaction in this person. I mean, it's not always supposed to make you feel good. So sometimes you have test screenings. People go, that was sick. I wouldn't tell anyone to see this. That's like kind of the highest compliment you can get. The best thing thing you can say about a horror film is don't see it, because when they say don't see it, it's too scary. There's the don't see it, it's terrible, don't waste your money. But there's a no, you can't handle this. Well, that's the ultimate dare. It's like saying, okay, why don't you go on the kiddie roller coaster? We'll be on the adult one because it's too scary for you. No, I can do it. I can make it through the ride. It's that same feeling.